So Manu, if I can bring the topic that he mentioned right now, um, about this existence of internet, the oncoming or onslaught of internet to an extent, since mother left. You know, those were the days when, I don't know, I can't imagine how the 60s were, but I remember somebody, if I'm not wrong, last year when we had this meeting with the ashramites, and the ones who prepared for the 50th celebration, they were sharing their experience, and one of them said they did not know how the maps were. Like they know the country, and they do not know how Philippines, how would it be, and there were no internet in those days. Like you can go and Google what the map is, and they had great difficulty going and finding that map and then replicating it. So, so such is the change, sea change, in the way we experience the world today. You know, it has really shrunk. And in this, how do we create an experience of diversity, where even the diverse worlds are becoming merging together and losing its spirit? You know, like the other day we discussed that even the cities now, before 30 years, perhaps before, if you go to Chennai, if you go to Chandigarh, if you go to Kolkata, it had its own cultural spirit. Now they are all merging. Yeah? So how do we perhaps achieve that in Auroville? And again, it's this experience. It's not just about it. You know, it's like a experience of experiencing a flower. It's not about just the description of it. And you can go and see the picture of it on the internet, but then to really experience a flower, it's something else. So, what do you think? How can architecturally, town planning wise, we can achieve that? What are your challenges right now in ATTC?
Well, we have not started working on the international zone officially, so I cannot say specifically about the challenges, but what I've observed from the earlier part of the question is that there is a sort of rise and ebb, like a sine curve of spiritual life, a spiritual awakening and a dying down, with all of this churning that's happening with the internet. You know, people are being suddenly forced to come together to protest against one thing. So it's mostly a negative topic that brings people together, and then sort of it ebbs, and then it ends up in some kind of a war or something, then again a protest. So it's more like in the shades of grey. So spiritual life is taking a back seat. So more in the physical and the vital. The internet is managing to keep us, because it's only the dark stories that sell and go viral on the internet. And Facebook and all these companies are cashing in on that.
Correct.
By promoting the dark stories. You know? So I would say our predecessors, people who were at the beginning of Auroville, were at a competitive advantage in spiritual life because they didn't have this kind of force to deal with. Because when they spoke to the sadhaks or when they spoke to a group, they didn't have to deal with all of this clouding of the mind.
Correct.
Yeah. So having said that, and the latter part, the practical part of realizing on the ground, I would say the biggest challenge is to deconstruct the political constructs of nationhood and of even countries coming together. For instance, the NATO countries, Axis powers leading to NATO, and then you have the European Union and with the Americans. And so all those forces, I could see, having lived here 10 years or so in international zone, I could see a lot of that working even within the planning process, you know. So how to overcome that in a practical day-to-day level, where those associations which are based on simple political unity, and that political unity is fueled by the news force. I would say the news force. Everybody is constantly clued in on the news, what is happening, and that force is pushing people to get polarized, you know. And people with the polarized notions are coming to achieve a great synthesis what Mother and Sri Aurobindo spoke. And with this background, how can you even start spelling the first part of the S of the synthesis? You can't even hope to do it. So those meetings of international zone planning, I've attended, I think, close to a year of these meetings.
Yeah.
Totally futile. Because all of it was about my fence and your fence, and how can I push this one that side, and how can I, those guys are coming to poop here, I want my fence extended, and these kind of things, and all this was being done at the back of ATDC, because constantly the talk was that ATDC is ineffective. And so we have to decide in the international zone. So it was like a quasi-government running the show here. And I would say we need to deconstruct these existing structures that govern the international zone. In fact, at one point I checked with ATDC. ATDC, in fact, was referring to the self-appointed groups here for building permissions. So, when the self-appointed groups were constantly throwing stones at the ATDC, it was really a ridiculous situation. Why would the ATDC do this? So anyway, so I think the first step would be to deconstruct, and then to look at the first principles laid down by Mother and Sri Aurobindo in a fresh research, which is clearly time bound, say 3 months. You have a research project with a clear set of outputs. We want to come up with a framework to redesign the international zone at the end of the 3-month period or whatever. And from that framework, you can make a design brief. And that design brief can be worked on in a collaborative process. Many architects and planners can be involved within Auroville and outside. And because the genius doesn't exist here. I feel it's all over the world. The genius of Belgium might have been captured by a Belgian poet somewhere, maybe 100 years back, whom we don't know about right now, and maybe there are universities in Belgium that can suggest, look at this person's work, So we need to do that little work, as Aurovillians to be catalysts.
If I may just add one more part to that, if Aurovillians need to be the catalyst, right now in Auroville we have about Auroville residents from about 56 nationalities. What about 140 who are not here? So do we leave that space blank for them, 0.4 each? How do we really address this when we do not have those representatives? Even the ones that are here, say 56 nationalities, many of them are like one individual, two individual, a family kind of situation. Perhaps what we have is 20-25 countries that are adequately represented, which can perhaps come together and think about their nation's soul and articulate it, and then come to you as ATDC with something. Otherwise, what do we do? Do we then wait for the government to engage? That's where the role of the government comes in.
I feel that the individuals in these small countries represented in India have practically no power to reach or convince their governments to act in Auroville. But the Indian government, considering the particular strategic role that India is playing in the world, being the president of G20 and a whole lot of other things India is engaged in, the voice of the Indian government is much more stronger, and other countries are able to receive it with grace. So if the Indian government would make an appeal to the countries of the world to participate in the international zone, to develop in small ways, to express the artifacts of their culture, food, whatever, dance, music, in terms of whichever way they would perceive it, and of course representing the fundamental genius of the country. So to involve the leading universities in those countries, to identify the right literary figures to lead that work, and to direct the architects of that nation, if possible, to participate, So if it is possible in the World Expo in Dubai and in Paris and all that, in short periods of time, led by those governments, Why is it not possible in India? You know, it's ridiculous to imagine it's not possible. In fact, it is more feasible if the government wants to do it than if any of us want to do it. No? So that's the only way ahead.
Fair enough.